Welcome to the Power of Team Will. I am your host, David. In this podcast, we'll be diving deep into the importance of fostering strong family relationships. Join us as we explore the power of teamwork within families and how it can positively impact our lives. Get ready to be inspired, uplifted, and motivated to strengthen the bonds within your own families. Let's unlock the power of Team Will together. Hello. Welcome to the Power of Team Will podcast. If you've been following these current episodes, these have been the episodes of the story of my Aunt Lucille, which has been a phenomenal interview. But I have to let you know, this is the last episode to her interview. So stay connected, people. And thank you for listening. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's cut to Aunt Lucille. Stay motivated. You and Uncle Jobs, your relationship, what was the best time that you can remember? That moment, what was that best moment that you can remember?
When I was married to him?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I had good memories of Giles, even before we even got our own place when we were living with Miss Mary.
Because, like, some of the things you mentioned, like, you can tell, like, man, he took me in, cared for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he bought you the clothes and like he laid out. Even though that, you know, he may have said, you know, I'm buying this woman for this amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like he just really wanted to be with you.
Yeah, he really wanted to be with me. Anybody could have told that. He really wanted me to be with me. But he was jealous of me now because he was 11 years older than I was.
Yeah. So when you was 15,
mm-hmm.
that means he had to been like 20 something.
He was 23.
23.
Mm-hmm. And at that time, you know, Miss Mary was very emotional because he was slipping around going with Mildred Cooper. That's Dee Dee's mother.
Yeah. He's just going back and forth. Juggling two women.
Yeah.
But this was all before marriage or during marriage?
During the marriage. After we married. She found out he had married me, and then she got upset with him. And then she told him, said, well, you're not married that helpful. So I'm going to see how good she is, you know, like this. And she would call out there to Miss Mary to leave a message with Miss Mary to get to Giles. Then Miss Mary told Mary to say, you don't call him no more. My son is married. And her and Mildred, you know, went back and forth. And then Miss Mary said, well, I tell you what happened. The best woman got the man. So Sia was the best woman, so you leave him alone. But that didn't stop it.
But one thing I would say as you telling the story, I do know, and I can also see like how some people be torn between you and Miss Mildred, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I guess throughout my lifetime, maybe just me, I'm just oblivious. But like, it just seemed like between you, Dee Dee, it's like Dee Dee and them always came around, and it seemed like it was no conflict.
I never had conflicts with them.
Yeah, it didn't seem like.
I didn't have no kind of conflicts with them. Because I always said, well, he had that child for me and him married. I had 2 children for me and him married. So I didn't have no right to be married with him because he had a child before we married. And he shouldn't have had no right to be married with me because I had to. Because he knew I had 2 children before we married. But I didn't know he had an outside child until we did marry. He didn't never tell me he had an outside child till we married.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't make no difference with me.
Yeah.
Because when I bought for mine, I bought for her. Although her mother would take the stuff and burn it up, she wouldn't let them. But
did Dee Dee ever stay with you?
Oh, yeah. Dee Dee stayed with us. I'm the one start Dee Dee hair growing. When Dee Dee didn't have no hair on her head. But I started keeping her hair washed, and and her hair started growing pretty. And then after Dita had all them children, all of them was out there with us.
Yeah, all of them. I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
And then I used to work and keep Hasty, Lisa's mama, because Lisa didn't know nothing about nothing like that. So I used to work, go home at 12 o'clock to make sure she done, trained her and everything and feed her, and I go back to work.
So, okay, I'm going to transition. So, I do want to learn a little bit about, from your perspective, of just, there's this church down in Florilla, Alabama.
Oh, talking about
There's a church.
First Baptist.
Yes. What from your knowledge, what do you remember about First Baptist before it was what it is today?
Oh, it was a wooden church.
A wooden piece of church.
Wooden piece of church. Mm-hmm. It had it wasn't even as big as it is now. Mm-hmm. It was just a wooden church. And at that time, oh Lord, what is his name? Oh, what is his name? His name don't come to me right now, but Billy Armstrong was the preacher there.
Okay.
And seemed like they wasn't making nothing. They were just going to church and going to church. But I remember when we joined the church, he was the preacher, he was the pastor there. But something about First Baptist drawed us to it. And we joined that church. And at that time, it had a rest of more of the members though. But at that time, it was just the peoples in there was all like, how would you say it?
Family oriented?
Now had their own little
cliques.
Mm-hmm. But when we joined the church, it seemed like the cliques died. And we always said they died because Java didn't take sides with them.
So when you went to that church, what was the first year that you can remember attending that church?
In 1970, I want to say in 75.
75?
No, it wasn't 75. Because in 75, we were living in Weewaw-Hitchcock.
Because
might have been the early 80s.
Mary born
Panama City.
77.
Mm-hmm. And right after Mary was born, we moved back up home. Mary was a year old. We moved.
But the starting of that church, though, was it before Mary was born or after?
After.
After Mary was born.
Yeah, I say we joined that in about 79.
No, okay.
Yeah, about 79.
So to make the church what it is to now, how did y'all, secure the money to build the church? Or
what happened? Got rid of Billy Armstrong. He wasn't the pastor no more. Reverend Tillman took over the church
in 1970 something, in the 80s or whatever. Okay.
Yes, in 1980. And I remember good. We used to have them meetings at the church, and Pastor Tillman always said we got to get this church recognized because this is the oldest church was in Florilla, First Baptist. Mm-hmm. And I remember we started saving money. Every time one of us saved $100, Brother Tillman would put $300. He always put more than
what everybody else.
Him and Giles always put more than anybody else in the church. And finally, one weekend, Giles went to work with Mike. When Giles come off from work with Mike Daniel, he called Reverend Tillman. Reverend Tillman come up there, and Mike Daniel had get Giles $5,000 going in for us to to the church. We didn't have to pay that. We didn't have to pay him that money back. He give it to Giles for a tax write-off. And then we went to Montgomery. We found everything we needed. And so we started working on that church. And that church was completed. I don't want to tell a story because it's on the church. What year it was remodeled. It's on the church. But that's how First Baptist got like it is, in the shape it is now, under Brother Tillman leadership.
And I remember going to church with him.
You do?
Yeah. My first baptism was in that church.
Sure was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's crazy. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Power Teen Will podcast. Yes, and this is the final episode. Thank you again for tuning in, listening to all those episodes of my Aunt Lucille's story. Yes, she is my aunt. She married my uncle, which my father's baby brother. And how I'm related to her, she had married into the family through my uncle, and I got a chance to spend my entire life with her, and I greatly appreciate it. But I want to have this time to have a little reflection period on the story that she talked about. And she was born in 1950. 1950 wasn't that long ago. We try to make it seem like stories like this happened back in the 18s, in the early 1900s. No, there are pockets of these things, of my Aunt Lucille's story, still going on today with we're talking and you're listening in 2024. So just a little reflection. From 1950 to about 1958, 59, my aunt worked on a plantation where she picked cotton, peanuts, all these different types of agriculture jobs, and she only did it for 25 cents a day. When we talk about 25 cents a day, listen to understand, her sisters, mom and dad, a total 21 kids, 21, 26, 21, 22, 23, which equals mom and dad. So 21, 22, 23 people on one farm only getting paid 25 cents, not per person, the entire family. And all the money went to the dad. So the dad got 25 cents and they utilized that to take care and maintain the family. And if you go back and look at the YouTube video, and the YouTube video showed the whole layout of how they lived on that plantation and how it works. But I'm sorry, that's not Andalusia, Alabama. That's actually when they moved to Adams Crossing. So let's keep with Andalusia. For 58, 59, she was in Andalusia, Alabama. And then what ended up happening is somebody came and convinced them to move to Georgia, which they lived on a different plantation. Where they did turpentine, that she called it, and stuff scraping off the tree. If you don't know what that is, I highly suggest that you go and look that up. That's another type of labor work, and what my aunt described is kind of like worse than picking cotton and picking the weeds and peanuts and all those different types of things. She said doing turpentine was worse than picking cotton. That's just her perspective. You may find a different family member that may say, nope, picking cotton was worse than Hey, to each his own. But what my aunt describes from her perspective is not something that she liked to do, whether it was the cotton or whether it's the turpentine, but it was a way of life. So now we're talking about 1959, 1960. She talked about doing turpentine, all this types of stuff. And my aunt also tell you that she had her first child around about 10 years old. But something happened to the baby, And she also talks about by the age of 15, she had already had 2 kids. At 15, as a black woman with 2 kids already. Now, then, while you're in Homerville, Georgia, she remember being taken in the middle of the night or whatever, I want to say, and she kind of went over to what you call that thing is Adam Crossings. I mean, getting the stories a little mixed up a little bit, but I do remember her talking about when she was in Adam Carson's and she got took in the middle of the night. I don't know if she was at Adam Carson's or either or, but it's just something to know that just from her perspective. And if you shout out and look at my YouTube video, you'll see where there was this guy, I want to say his name, Mr. Miller, and he was like 7 years old. So as we was passing, going back to show where my aunt was, Mr. Miller was on a lawnmower. So I'm driving by with my aunt in the vehicle, and it's like, my aunt's like, this is it. This is Adams Crossing. I said, it is? I said, you should have told me. I would have stopped here first. We was on our way to Florilla, Alabama. So we stopped there, and I saw a man cutting the grass. I was kind of going to low-key record the area, but he was cutting the grass. I stopped and talked to him, and my aunt is 74, and he was 78 on the time, and they remember as kids doing things together. And you'll see in that video on YouTube that I put that you'll see him and my aunt reflect different moments of where they remember picking cotton. Mr. Miller's a white guy. He picked cotton. My aunt picked cotton. So when she came to this plantation, it was a little bit better treatment. She said it was a better treatment, but she also said that she wasn't allowed to go to church with them. They weren't allowed to go to school. They weren't allowed to go into the house. She remembers going out to the back of the house, but she still say they got a little better treatment than it was from another plantation. I just think that's a unique story. She said, in the Miller guy, that's 78 that was there, he was reflecting on the story, but he really didn't comment on the idea of the whole idea of being segregated or anything like that. And I don't think he really just paid it any attention. It just kind of ignored it. But my aunt talks about, and it's right there in front of him. Yeah, we used to come out here to the back and get our food. We wasn't allowed to go in there. And she was reflecting on all these stories. And Mr. Miller just right there, he's remembered too. They even talk about it in the video that my aunt remember being packed up on the middle of the night, being on a truck and being snatched from that plantation and moved to another plantation to go work. And she remember all these things. And a lot of these things are validated in different conversations had with her sisters and brothers. She remember this. But one thing I also know that my aunt didn't have anything but a higher than a third grade education. A lot of our family members, where I can say my family, if you're talking about Team Will, that's my family. And I need you to check the education level within your family. Some people didn't have an option to graduate from high school because they was told work was more important than any type of schooling that you can have. Farming that land. Only skill that you could develop is picking somebody else's crops from the land. So if that's all you know and you eat, you pick crops and have level of doing what you want, you're picking and farming for the benefit of somebody else's success, which is the white people that they work for. Now, that's just something that I've learned to take and that we need to pay attention to. And I didn't have many good examples of men in my lifetime and when I was living, but there was men that was there. But they was taught in only one thing, which is to work. So me growing up and trying to connect with them on a more personal level, all they knew was work. And my aunt talks about when her dad, Charlie Tyson, didn't show up to work on time, which all his kids was working, but he didn't show up. The guy that was in charge of the plantation whooped him with a whip, beat him. She also talks about how Charlie Tyson was put in jail for accused of burning down or doggone what? Some type of building. And my aunt was like, he didn't do it. But they didn't care. He spent 9 months in jail. So we talk about all the things that that family endured. When I say that family, it's talking about my Aunt Lucille, her sisters, her brothers, her mom and her dad, her mom probably raped. No, I ain't gonna say probably. Her mom was raped. Dad beat. Dad not having control of their said kids because their kids were only there to work and labor. And if they got out of line, something happened beyond out of his control. So Charlie Tyson didn't have truly control over his family, nor did the wife. So we talking about Charlie and his wife, all this trauma that they had to endure and still raise 21 kids in this environment. Now, some people ask the question, why stay in it? Why not move? Some black people in the South did move. They migrated to places like Chicago, D.C., New York. Some people stayed in the South. I can't answer those questions. The only person that can answer that sometimes is those people that stayed in those environments. And sometimes the trauma that they endured, they're not willing to share because it's so traumatized. They're traumatized of it, meaning that my Aunt Lucille talks about for the longest, she used to dream about it. She used to have problems sleeping and still trying to raise kids that she was forced to have or was raped into. And still, there was no education. There was no talk about mental health. It was all about work. And we put so much responsibility on people like Aunt Lucille and the generations before us to produce a better generation in us when they had no skill to do. That's something that I've learned. But what I could say is this: Charlie Tyson and his wife had 21 kids. And his responsibility is to give slightly better than what he had to endure. And I want to say Charlie Tyson and his wife did that. Aunt Lucille and her husband has a responsibility to give their kids a slight better life than what she endured. And I want to say she did that. And I want to say all her sisters and brothers have to have that same mission to not allow their children to endure what they endure, to slightly give them a little better life. And I ask my family specifically to reflect on that. Look at your parents and see what they had to endure and see where you at, and did they provide or give you somewhat of an opportunity to be in the better? Because a lot of these family members that we had, they didn't have no education. They didn't even graduate high school. They didn't even get past elementary school. That's out of their control. They couldn't control that. But they did stay married. They did stay married. But they didn't stay married because half the time they didn't want to. They probably didn't have a choice. Aunt Lucille and a lot of those didn't have an essential skill that they can market anywhere outside Florella, Lockhart, Homerville, Georgia, those small towns where they just used us for labor. While if you notice, Mr. Miller talks about how his land was passed to him by another landowner. We have to go purchase and acquire this land. And land was passed from white man to white man free of charge. And we had to go pay for it. She talks about the emotional abuse. But when she left Homerville and went to Adams Crossing, Idea Lockhart, she talks about my Uncle Jarvis meeting her and approaching her dad and telling her dad that I want this woman. I give it $25 for this woman. And her dad was like, sold for $25. My Uncle Jarvis bought my Aunt Lucille for $25. And I asked my Aunt Lucille, how did that make you feel? Did you enjoy it? She's like, no, she was hurt by it. She didn't want to leave her family, but she was sold to it for $25. So the same behavior that was done to Charlie Tyson did to his family. Now, I don't agree with that, But a lot of them didn't understand anything but that. That was the way of life then. I'm talking like of acceptance. No. Some people was forced against their will. And us as kids say now, well, you couldn't put me in that environment. If I was in that environment, I've been to fuck somebody up, or I've been to did it. You don't know what you would have did. Some people would have ran, some people didn't. Some people in slavery ran, and some people died. Some people was hung. Some people endured it. And the people that did push through it had us. And the people who didn't push through it died and didn't get a chance to produce a next generation of kids. I try to reflect on that myself, but what I don't want to happen is to ensure that my kids take us back to those days. And that's why I try to do my best to tell these stories and teach these kids these stories so we don't repeat history. That means we reflect, we understand, we learn, and learn how to make a better future. That's something that I try to focus on. And I think we all need to focus on when we lose track sometimes. And sometimes we like to point the blame at Aunt Lucille or Uncle Red or any of her sisters and brothers on the life that they live, or Aunt Lucille's mom or Aunt Lucille's dad. No. We're here. I'm an adult now. It's my responsibility to sustain and fight for this next generation. And I understand that. Aunt Lucille taught me that women are not to be raped, shouldn't be. Women should not be taken advantage of against their will, because they are people too. They have feelings, they hurt, they have emotions. Sometimes we lose focus that as men, sometimes we lose focus that women are human beings too, because we're conditioned that way. We're brought up in an environment that way until we decide to tell these stories and see how the trauma has just overwhelmingly, just been on Aunt Lucille. Those demons been on Aunt Lucille's back, and we need to help get those demons off her back. And the only way we can do that is learning from these stories and hope that we do not create an environment where we continue to have to repeat what Aunt Lucille went through, or what I had to go through, or what Aunt Lucille's kids have to go through. So reflect on it, please. I wanted you an opportunity to try to keep peace with one another, but Aunt Lucille has a unique story. Remember, recap. Aunt Lucille was born in 1950. Plantations, working the fields, cottons, to the 50s, to the 60s. And myself, living out there with Uncle Jarvis and them, and his kids, her kids, I don't know if they ever picked cotton. I don't know. You got to ask them. But I tell you what, I remember being out there with Aunt Lucille and Uncle Jarvis, and I was out there shucking corn, field peas. I remember working them fields. Hey, David Jr., take these doggone, buckets of peas to Mr. John. I don't know if that money was paid to him. I did it. I didn't know it better. I was a child. I was doing what I was told to do. I was in those fields. I was farming somebody else's man land. I was doing that. So we're just that first generation. I, myself, Mary Alice, Darren, Regina, all of them, we're that generation that hopefully stopped it, and it finally stopped with us about being in those fields. And none of us own any of those fields. And Aunt Lucille has land that's still out there. Now, one of the key questions I asked Aunt Lucille with all this land, like, what do we do with all that land? How do you set up shop, put houses on it, and gain financial money? Because if you move out there on that land, you got to be able to sustain some type of income on that land. And a lot of it is based on farming. cows, hogs, and everything like that. But if you're in an environment like down in Florida, Alabama, who is really going to do the business and allow us to grow in that business without cows, chickens, and everything like that? We have to sell that product to the white people in Florilla and Lakewood, which is called something else now. We have to sell that product to them. I would hope that they allow us to be at the table and to make the amount of wealth that they're making still in those cities and towns, because that money goes back to them. Somebody's making the majority of the money. It ain't us as black people. All our black people is working in those communities that benefit other white people. We're working at Hardee's, we're working at the grocery stores. Are they really going to allow us the opportunity to build a monopoly and take over half that town, me as a black African-American man that's born and raised from there? Are they going to let me do that? Maybe there's some people out there in Lakewood, Florida, that's doing that. But in my family, I haven't met them. Usually the people that do fairly good, they leave that environment. They have to leave from where they was born, where they was raised, from their family, while the white landowners get to create land and have generation after generation after generation be raised up in that same land and not have to want for money, have to want for food, clothes, and everything else while we struggle off the scraps or the little small money that they give us so we don't have to, so they don't have to file it on their taxes. I don't know. But it's just something to think about. This is my reflection period. Thank you all for tuning in to the Power Team Will podcast. I plan to do more of these interviews, episodes, and I try to give insight, everything related to the family. If we're going to talk about money, talk about money. Talk about politics, talk about politics. I try to be equipped to talk about anything. But one of the things I want to do is build up the family's education, because education is wealth. Education is power. Education, financial literacy is not just knowing about money. It's knowing how to build money and put it to work. And we need to start doing that. Once again, thank you for tuning in to the Power Team Will podcast. I want y'all to stay motivated out